Terror cannot be accepted as a new form of war. The world needs to identify state sponsors of terrorism and act against them. Funding to terrorist groups needs to stop. Terrorists cannot be treated like heroes. On a day the Indian Army chief spoke these words, a picture surfaced, bringing home the constant threat that terror state Pakistan poses to India. It was a picture of a boat. The boat used by 5 Jaish terrorists who were trying to enter India earlier this week. They were gunned down by troops in Jammu and Kashmir, but this incident rekindles concerns of how the Western neighbour is using every means to push terrorism into India.
On Sunday night, the Indian Army killed 5 terrorists of Pakistan-based group Jaish-e-Mohammed, plotting what could have been a major terror attack ahead of Republic Day. These terrorists were trying to cross the Jhelum River in a boat in Jammu and Kashmir's Uri sector. 2 days later, security forces released pictures of the boat the terrorists travelled on to try and infiltrate into India. It looked nothing more than an ordinary raft, aimed at raising minimum suspicion. But this is not the first time that Pakistani terrorists have tried to penetrate India's borders by using boats. On December 31st, 2014, a suspicious fishing boat, which is believed to have sailed from Karachi in Pakistan, was intercepted off the coast of Gujarat. The Coast Guard warned the boat to stop for further investigation, but it increased speed and tried to escape from the Indian side of maritime boundary. According to the Indian government, the Coast Guard finally managed to stop the boat by firing warning shots. But the crew on board set the boat on fire, resulting in a major explosion. In November 2008, a fishing trawler called Kuber was hijacked by 10 terrorists from Pakistan. They rowed the boat to reach Mumbai and laid siege on the city for 3 days, killing as many as 166 people. According to investigation agencies, the 10 terrorists were spotted by local fishermen as they disembarked from the boat in Mumbai's Kolaba area. 8 of the terrorists got off and offloaded their bags full of explosives and assault rifles, while 2 of them went back to sea and headed towards the Trident and Oberoi hotels, 2 of the most prominent locations of the 26/11 terror attacks. India has more than 4,000 kilometers of an open coastline, which is vulnerable to terror attacks and smuggling of arms and ammunition. After the Mumbai terror attacks, India's national coastal defence apparatus underwent a radical overhaul. But there are still several crippling gaps that need to be filled to make Indian cities safe and secure. Bureau Report, WION.
Security is a challenge along the eastern border too, and Pakistan plays no small part in it. In the teeming camps housing more than 600,000 Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, a quiet insurgency is brewing. Myanmar's military brass is already losing sleep over it after an ambush on one of its convoys a few days back injured 2 army personnel and 1 civilian driver. This ambush is suspected to be the work of the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, or ARSA. Some reports say the outfit has claimed responsibility. WION has not been able to independently verify who was behind this attack. But if it is indeed ARSA, it raises a host of questions even for India. This ambush took place on the 5th of January near Muang Dao, a town in Myanmar's western Rakhine state. Myanmar Army intelligence believes a group of 10, possibly even 20 men, some of them armed, crossed over from Bangladesh and trekked to the attack site 15 kilometers away. How could they trek so far without being detected is still a mystery. Now this is where it gets interesting. The Myanmar military seems to have broken down the method of this attack. A mine or improvised explosive device was detonated on the convoy's route. It was done remotely, probably through a mobile phone or radio transceiver. Automatic rifle fire rained down on the convoy from high ground opposite. After a brief exchange of fire, the gunmen withdrew. The use of IEDs or mines and remote detonation are as old as the hills. The blast was low intensity, suggesting the explosive was fabricated locally. But the Rohingya are never known to have had any expertise in this area. The use of the automatic rifle suggests a supply source has now been established. The question then is, who is paying for all of this? By all indications, India's western neighbour. And this could be the prelude to more powerful weapons, probably rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns being used by the Rohingya terrorists. And this would tie in with the Myanmar military suspicion that ARSA is running a clandestine training centre near Teknaf in Bangladesh. In the coming days, in fact, Myanmar will probably share details of the attack with India. The manner of the attack and the weapons used would confirm the view of many in India that it was justified in declaring last September that the Rohingya had terror links. The Union Home Ministry had even indicated that it would share information with the Supreme Court showing Rohingya links with Pakistan armed groups. The Home Ministry later submitted an affidavit to the Supreme Court. It justified India's stance on deporting 40,000 Rohingya refugees. It categorized them as illegal immigrants. There was also, in fact, evidence of illegal transfer of money to them. Rohingya refugees have been in India since 2011. They've settled in 6 states, including Assam, West Bengal, Jammu and Delhi. How did they manage to reach Jammu, for instance? Who took them? Who paid for all of this? All these questions still remain unanswered. But WION has been reporting from these regions over the past few months. Earlier this week, in fact, we showed you how Rohingyas at a refugee camp in Bengal's North 24 Parganas admit that they entered India illegally. So while the world preached Myanmar and slammed India for turning away these so-called hapless souls, this should be a wake-up call. In fact, on 21st December last year, WION was the first to bring you a report on how Pakistan wants to lure displaced Rohingyas. At the center of the story was the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, or ARSA once again. WION investigated ARSA's links to Pakistan's notorious intelligence agency, the ISI. And here's what we found.
The influx of Rohingyas into Bangladesh has been one of the biggest humanitarian crises staring the global community. The mass exodus has posed a major challenge to the Bangladesh government. The refugees have added to the struggle over limited resources in the country. But there is another threat that the refugees pose before the South Asian region. Pakistan is hatching a conspiracy with Rohingya terror groups. That is what Bangladesh's Transport Minister Obaidul Qadir claims. The Bangladesh government has discovered that Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, is behind a plan to radicalize displaced Rohingyas. Qadir could be hinting at Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which has been linked to Pakistan-based terrorist groups. Last year, India and Bangladeshi intelligence agencies chanced upon fresh evidence that revealed the inner workings of ARSA and its links with the ISI. Intelligence officials intercepted 3 telephonic conversations between 23rd and 24th of August in 2017. Raids and further investigation by Bangladeshi authorities revealed the involvement of Brigadier Ashfaq and Major Salamat of the ISI, who were in touch with Hafiz Tohar, the military wing chief of ARSA. One such call was made on 23rd of August, where Tohar received instructions to hit multiple targets within the next 48 hours. Attack right after the black man submits his report.
Yes, sir, whatever you say, but it cannot happen before the night of 24th.
The ISI officer wanted ARSA to attack right after former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan submitted his report on the Rohingya crisis. They spoke again the next day, when Brigadier Ashfaq ordered Tohar to launch terror attacks as soon as possible. Here is another excerpt. When is the black man making his report public?
At 3 p.m, in a few minutes from now.
Why are you taking so much time?
It takes time to convey the message.
The ARSA became a subject of global news coverage when they struck 30 police posts in Rakhine on 25th August 2017. 12 people were killed in the attack. The refugee crisis poses a massive security challenge for South Asia. It's a concern that the Indian government has also raised. ISI's involvement with ARSA raises more fears that the Rohingya crisis could be used to foment more trouble in the region. Bureau Report, WION.
If the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army did indeed carry out the attack on January 5th, it adds another element to India's eastern complex security environment. The first concern is, how will Myanmar act? In the past, the Myanmar army has carried out cross-border operations in Thailand in hot pursuit of insurgents. There is an understanding that the Thai military will not prevent the Myanmar army from crossing over. But it's unlikely the Bangladesh military will allow the Myanmar army in its territory, largely because the Myanmar army is regarded as anti-Muslim because of its atrocities that were allegedly inflicted on the Rohingya. The public and political parties in Bangladesh may even pressure the ruling Awami League to take a tough stand, which may result in clashes between the two armies. So that's a no-no. Incidentally, the two armies are about evenly matched. The Bangladesh army is probably better disciplined, but it's difficult to predict who could win a conflict which would devastate them economically. India will be caught in a bind, having to choose between two neighbours whose goodwill it has cultivated for decades. Things could get worse if the ARSA unleashes a broad insurgency in Rakhine state in Myanmar. This could well test the Myanmar army's capabilities. It is already stretched by insurgencies in other parts of the country. And this could spiral out of the Myanmar army's control, turning Rakhine into a religious battleground, a jihad in India's backyard. And this would provide just the opening for Pakistan to step in further, to make more inroads. There's also nothing to prevent the ARSA from linking up with anti-India groups in Pakistan. It already is working with some. It could be the Kaplang faction of the Naga rebels in the east, or the United Liberation Front of Assam, ULFA, whose leader Paresh Barua is based in Yunnan in China. Evidence is not lacking about China's links with northeast insurgent groups, including ULFA. China has meddled in Nagaland in the past. It could reopen that front to include the entire northeast, destabilizing that region. So the concerns for India are very real here. All of this, though, is not to say that there aren't victims of this tragedy. Men, women and children, thousands of them, have been unfairly caught in the crossfire and forced to flee their homes. The plight of the Rohingya refugees has become one of the world's biggest humanitarian crises. Nearly 1 million of them have had to flee persecution in their own country. And now that the Aung San Suu Kyi government has agreed on a repatriation timeline with Bangladesh, the worry for these refugees is that they may return to the same situation they escaped.
The plight of hundreds of thousands of Rohingyas is the world's fastest growing refugee crisis. They have risked death by sea or on foot and fled the destruction of their homes and persecution in the northern Rakhine province of Myanmar since August last year. The United Nations calls it a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, but the Myanmar military has denied targeting civilians, claiming they are fighting Rohingya terrorists instead. The exodus began in August 2017 after Rohingya terrorists attacked more than 30 police posts. Rohingyas say they fled after troops backed by local Buddhist mobs responded by burning their villages and attacking and killing civilians.
An insurgent group has waged a movement against the government in Myanmar. We moved to Bangladesh in the face of their atrocities. This group had confined us for 8 days in our village and did not let us go outside for groceries or even to get water. After some days, we got to know that they had killed many Burmese Hindus in Fakira Bazaar, which is 2 kilometers away from our village.
The Bangladeshi city of Cox's Bazar, bordering Myanmar, is where a majority of Rohingyas have set up camp. Men, women and children with barely any belongings have sought shelter in these areas, with little access to aid, safe drinking water, food or healthcare.
This is just a stretch of the Cox's Bazar roads, and I've stopped by here to find only Rohingyas stopping and sitting in these tree sides and roadsides, waiting to be able to find some home in the makeshift camps that are being built in various parts of this district in Cox's Bazar, mostly in Kutupalong and Ukhia and places like this in the bordering states.
The Rohingyas are one of the largest ethnic minorities in Myanmar. Rohingya Muslims represent the largest percentage of Muslims in the country, with a majority living in Rakhine State. Myanmar is a predominantly Buddhist country, but the government refuses to recognize them and has denied them citizenship and even excluded them from the 2014 census. For the Myanmar government, Rohingyas are illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. The Rohingya crisis has become a massive humanitarian catastrophe. According to Doctors Without Borders, at least 6,700 Rohingyas were killed in the month after the violence broke out. Amnesty International says the Myanmar military also raped and abused Rohingya women and girls. At least 288 villages were partially or totally destroyed in northern Rakhine, according to Human Rights Watch. The whole Rohingya refugee population, which is almost 1 million people, require food aid. More than 21,000 children under the age of 5 have been treated for severe acute malnutrition. Keeping the Rohingya refugees alive and healthy requires at a bare minimum enough shelter, food and water, medical assistance and toilets. Even 6 months after the exodus began, humanitarian agencies are struggling to keep resources in place. Refugee camps are too small and the number of refugees is increasing by the day. Geopolitics is only complicating matters. For both Bangladesh and India, where most Rohingyas have fled to, the refugees pose a security risk. After massive pressure from the international community, Myanmar agreed to take back Rohingyas from Bangladesh, and both countries have set a 2-year deadline to complete the repatriation process. But for the Rohingyas, the worry is that they may return to the same situation they escaped. Bureau Report, WION.
Welcome back. On Gravitas Frontline tonight, we are featuring a very special leader, the Raksha Mantri or Defence Minister of India, who's making waves and leading from the front. Today, she became the country's first woman Defence Minister to undertake a sortie on the Air Force's formidable fighter aircraft Sukhoi 30 MKI. Here's a look at her rendezvous with air warriors in Jodhpur.
Great experience with the group captain, Garg, having taken me around in Su-30 MKI, which is a made in India fighter. For all the preparations, it was a very smooth ride. The group captain has made me feel absolutely at ease, but showed his excellence in flying. He crossed 1 Mach, also crossed 8,000 meters.
After today's sortie, Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman joined a rather exclusive club of politicians and public figures who have flown in fighter jets before. Former Defence Minister George Fernandes was perhaps India's first Defence Minister to fly in a Sukhoi. He took that flight 15 years ago, in 2003, from the Lohegaon Air Force Station in Pune. 3 years later, APJ Abdul Kalam became the first president of this country to fly in a Sukhoi 30 fighter plane. President Kalam was 74 years old when he went on that sortie. After the 30-minute-long flight, he said that flying in a fighter aircraft was his childhood dream. President Kalam's successor, Pratibha Patil, followed in the footsteps of her predecessor. She flew in the Sukhoi in 2009 from the Pune Air Base of the Indian Air Force. During this 20-minute sortie without maneuvers, she flew at a speed of more than 800 kilometers an hour at the height of a little more than 2 kilometers. And coming to the present government, the Minister of State for Home Affairs, Kiren Rijiju, was perhaps the last politician to fly in a fighter jet before the Defence Minister today. Rijiju boarded the Sukhoi aircraft from the Halwara base in Punjab in 2016 for around 20 minutes. And I wonder if you're wondering why politicians fly fighter jets at all. What does it achieve? Consider this. In December 2001, then Air Chief Marshal Yashwant Tipnis flew in a MiG-21 to reassure his government and, more importantly, the families of the MiG-21 pilots that it was a safe aircraft to fly. He was also telling his government that MiG crashes were less due to faults in the aircraft per se and more because rookie pilots were graduating from turboprop trainer aircraft to high-flying MiGs. There was no intermediate jet to train on. When politicians fly in fighter jets, they're essentially making political statements. President Pratibha Patil, for one, was the first woman politician, actually the first woman, to ever fly in an Su-30 MKI in November 2009. It was a message to the Air Force, equally to India's political class, that the armed forces must open their doors to women. The message was most appreciated by young women out there, and today the Air Force is training its first batch of women fighter pilots. In December 2011, Patil rode on the turret of a T-90 tank during army exercises in the Rajasthan desert. It did not really change the army's aversion to women in combat formations, but on the positive side, the army is now open to having women serve in all ranks in the military police. That's a start, you would say. The Indian Navy commissioned its first woman pilot last November. It also opened the doors to women officers in the Armament Inspectorate, where 3 currently serve. None of this happened simply because of Pratibha Patil, of course. It reflects a broader commitment to the cause of women by successive Indian governments. Granted that MPs have blocked reservations of seats for women in Parliament, but women are ubiquitous in the Central Armed Police Forces, where there are Mahila battalions now. In April 2012, BSF women constables shot dead a Pakistani trying to infiltrate in the Dera Baba Nanak sector. So if there are any reservations about women being too squeamish about killing, perish that thought. And coming back to my question, it is this confidence that a sortie like today's inspires. So we've spoken about the minister. Let's talk about her ride now. The Sukhoi still remains one of the most advanced fighter aircrafts in the world. And the Sukhoi, developed by India in collaboration with Russia, is a lion in the airspace. Called the Su-30 MKI, as you heard the minister also say, and this is aviation jargon, India's Sukhoi is far more advanced than the Sukhoi used by the Russians and the Chinese. In fact, Russia was so impressed by the Indian variant of this Sukhoi that they decided to order a fleet of 30 aircrafts of similar design for their own air force. So what gives the Indian Sukhoi an edge? The fighter features state-of-the-art avionics, which were developed by Russia, India and Israel jointly. What are avionics? They're the electronic systems used on fighter aircraft. India, alongside Russia and Israel, developed special avionics for display, navigation, targeting and electronic warfare. And some of the other avionics for the Sukhoi were supplied by France and South Africa. Now, if the Indian Air Force already has such an advanced aircraft in its fleet, why are we purchasing the Rafale from the French? The Indian Air Force wants to add a multi-role medium-range combat aircraft to their fleet. The Sukhoi is a heavy aircraft. In fact, it weighs more than 18,000 kilos. It also requires regular maintenance. One Sukhoi may be enough to take down all enemies in hostile territory, but the fighter jet is known for its high fuel consumption. So the short and simpler answer is this: you cannot use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. You need both. Now, there's a lot of buzz around India's deal with the French government to buy the Rafale fighters. So why does India still need the Sukhoi in its fleet? The Sukhoi 30 MKI was developed by Russia's Sukhoi for India and built by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. It's a heavy, all-weather and long-range fighter. The Sukhoi has more speed and thrust than the Rafale. Last year in November, India successfully test-fired the BrahMos missile from the Sukhoi 30. The presence of the Sukhoi completes the tactical cruise missile triad for India, which means that Indian Defence Forces can fire the BrahMos from land, sea and air. And this means that the Sukhoi can even fire nuclear missiles. Rafale will be a new addition for the Indian Defence Forces, but initially, Indian pilots would naturally trust the Sukhoi more Many of the Indian pilots have spent hundreds of hours inside this aircraft. In fact, 12 Indian Air Force bases have the Sukhoi squadrons as of today. And now for our special ground report from the line of control. Guarding the LOC and maintaining its sanctity is a task that requires the Indian Army to be battle-ready at all times. WION's Raghavendra Rao visited the training facility that makes these soldiers fully equipped to take on the enemy.
A soldier needs to be tough, both physically and psychologically, to be effective while serving in a conflict zone like the line of control, where enemy fire is a constant danger. Understanding what makes these soldiers the fighting machines that they are is critical. WION travelled to the training facility where soldiers due for deployment on the LOC are first trained to measure up to the challenges they will face. Located an hour's drive from Srinagar is the 15 Core Battle School in Crew. At any given time, around 2,000 soldiers are undergoing training here. Annually, close to 35,000 soldiers get trained here before being deployed on the LOC and in the hinterland, where they will carry out counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency operations. Firing is regarded as the most critical part of the training regime. The men are trained to fire while moving in buddy pairs, firing while crawling under enemy fire, and are instructed on how to respond when fired upon in civilian populated areas. Troops get their first taste of what they could encounter while launching ambushes and patrols. Night ambush training readies them towards action in the pitch darkness. It teaches them how to pinpoint the direction from where they are being fired upon despite zero visibility. Another key component of training at 15 CBS includes operating in civilian areas where the chances of collateral damage are immense. An entire village, christened Takhribal, has been set up at this training school to simulate a real village environment. Training at Takhribal provides soldiers a taste of what they'll encounter while conducting operations in villages, either on the line of control or in areas in the valley. Before being deployed at the line of control, soldiers of the Indian Army are made to undergo intensive training at the 15 Core Battle School in Crew near Srinagar. This is the place where these soldiers are trained for the challenges they are going to face all along the line of control, where the enemy is watching them most of the times. And as the motto of 15 CBS goes, future victories begin here. We train them to fight, they fight to kill, is the mantra the 15 CBS lives by. At the 15 Core Battle School in Crew, with video journalist Ajit Thakur, Raghavendra Rao, WION.
This may seem unrelated, but bear with me. What you saw in the Siberian village is one consequence of global warming and excesses on the environment. What you'll see next is another. Iconic tourist destination Cape Town is set to become the world's first major city to run out of water. After 3 years of unprecedented drought, Cape Town has less than 90 days worth of water in its reservoirs. And that's when they'll hit day zero. The deadline is inching closer. The window to fix the problem is shrinking. According to reports, the residents do not, if they do not heavily cut down the use of water on a daily basis, the taps will soon run dry.
There is going to happen whether the government wants to do it or not. I think the water is going to run out. And it's very scary to think of it, but I think it's a reality. And we definitely have to do our part and use as little water as possible. But I do hope that the government is doing something to prevent day zero, because it will be a national crisis. It will be honestly horrific when day zero comes. It's going to be very scary. But I think it's a reality, unfortunately.
Oh, terrible, because we can't bath anymore. We must just shower, and every other day we shower to save water. But we make do. We make.
City authorities say once the reservoirs reach 13.5% capacity, the water supply will be turned off for all except essential services like hospitals. Dam levels are currently below 30%. Authorities have capped water usage at 87 litres a person per day. It's been described as the most severe restriction of its kind ever put in place. As they say, desperate times, desperate measures. Unprecedented challenges. Americans will most likely add their president to that list. The current debate is about the sanity of Donald Trump. Let's put the facts out on the table first. US President Donald Trump has passed a crucial test with flying colors. It's not a political test, but it does have a bearing on his political career. He called for his own medical checkup, a highly unusual decision that appears to have stemmed from the explosive claims in the recently published tell-all book, Fire and Fury. The White House doctor who examined President Trump has given him a perfect score on cognitive skills, which he says shows that he is perfectly fit to discharge his duties, and he's also confirmed that the US president himself asked to undergo the cognitive test to answer his critics.
The president is mentally very sharp, very intact. And
do you believe he is fit for duty?
Absolutely, he's fit for duty. I think he will remain fit for duty for the remainder of this term and even for the remainder of another term if he's elected. The American Psychiatric Association has said so too. I think that the people shouldn't be making those kinds of assessments about the president unless they've had the opportunity to get to know him and examine him. And in my opinion, that's just tabloid psychiatry, and I just don't. I'm not going to address it or fall into to responding to those kinds of questions or accusations.
So what else does the medical test of one of the world's most powerful leaders reveal? The US president is 71 years old. His appendix was removed when he was 11. His high cholesterol and is borderline obese. The doctor says he's in excellent health. But the reporters who attended the press conference asked some tough questions to this doctor. How can someone who survives on McDonald's and fries be so healthy? A very pertinent question, I would say. Can you believe it? The doctor put it down to the genes of the president.
It's called genetics. I don't know. It's some people have just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. I mean, he has incredible genes. I just assume. But I would say the answer to your question is he has incredibly good genes, and it's just the way God made him.
Incredible is the word. Let's also point out how unusual this press conference was. It went on for 1 long hour. The doctor answered every little detail about the US president's health at Trump's own request, we are told. So if I could borrow the words of Alice in Wonderland, this presidency gets curiouser and curiouser. How did the health of a US president suddenly become a major talking point? The Americans have a trust issue when it comes to the health of their leader. And there is a reason for that. Nearly half of the presidents in the history of the United States have lied about their health while in office. They hid their health problems from the public. While there is no law in the US which states that an elected official should submit a health disclosure, in modern times, presidential candidates and presidents have made their health data public. There was no immediate trigger for this. It was a while in the making. In fact, in 1972, Thomas Eagleton, a vice presidential candidate, dropped out of the election after it came to light that he was hospitalized for depression. This obviously ended Eagleton's political career, and this discovery became a case study for all future politicians. So now it's a practice in America. Unfortunately, most other countries do not follow suit. So if those of you sitting in India and watching this broadcast want to know about the health of their local leader, what can you do? They disclose their assets, they disclose their educational qualifications during elections, but what about their physical and mental fitness to become lawmakers? Can you file a right to information application to get it? No. Health records are private and confidential and do not come under the purview of RTI. I'm afraid there is no recourse, in fact. No law as of now that binds a politician running for public office in India to share his or her data. In fact, the health of India's parliamentarians is often kept under wraps and remains a touchy subject for many of them. All that has lent to debate is the age of the leaders assuming high office. The current government has set a limit of 75 years for a cabinet post. Meanwhile, the untimely death of former Tamil Nadu Chief Minister J.J. Lalitha and speculation about Congress leader Sonia Gandhi's health have raised demands for some sort of guidelines which make it mandatory for Indian lawmakers to share their health records. The online petitions are yet to find enough supporters, though, so that's where it rests. Enough about leaders and Donald Trump. Now to Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, who has warned of Brexit's quote-unquote negative consequences and hoped for, as he put it, a change of heart among his British friends. The speech has many in Britain hoping for a second referendum on Brexit, but for opposing reasons. WION's Mandy Clark has the story from London.
It was an unexpected speech to European politicians that has reignited the debate in Britain if Brexit can be stopped.
Brexit will become a reality with all its negative consequences in March next year, unless there is a change of heart among our British friends.
Donald Tusk used the Brexit Secretary's own words against him, saying, wasn't it David Davis himself who said, if a democracy cannot change its mind, it ceases to be a democracy. He followed his speech with a tweet.
We here on the continent haven't had a change of heart. Our hearts are still open to you.
A staunch Remain campaigner, the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, supported Tusk. Donald Tusk is right. The world has moved on since June 2016. Brexiteers keep banging on about freedom, but one of the greatest freedoms is the freedom to change your mind. While the Leave EU Twitter made a sharp quip about Tusk's speech. Donald Tusk, that clingy ex that doesn't get the message. Britain remains still a deeply divided country over Brexit, while Remainers have cheered his speech, seeing it as hope to remain in the European Union. Many Brexiteers see it as a cynical tactic by the EU to try and keep Britain in the bloc. It seems like it was pro-Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage's call for a second referendum that inspired Tusk's speech. While Farage believes a second vote would see even more support for Brexit, Remain campaigners believe the opposite is true. A new poll suggests that more than half of Britain would back another say on EU membership, but the government has said there will be no second vote ahead of the UK's exit in March 2019. Mandy Clark, WION, London.
A car seized by the US military in France in 1939 has driven into headlines almost 90 years later. Luxury Mercedes limousine used to ferry Hitler around Germany is now up for sale. Here's a report.
It's been billed as the most historically significant automobile ever offered for public sale. Why so? A 7.7-litre supercharged engine, speed of more than 160 kilometers an hour. The number plate 1A148461. The pseudonym Super Mercedes, and Adolf Hitler standing in the front seat. These are the features of the 1939 luxury Mercedes limousine, which was Germany's Nazi leader Adolf Hitler's propaganda engine. It is all set to be auctioned in the US state of Arizona. It is believed that Hitler used the car on his victory parade through Berlin following the defeat of France and for a state visit by Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. The car has travelled its own journey as well. After the war turned against Germany, the Mercedes was not used much and was captured by US forces who put it into a military police motor pool. Then it rubbed hands with a private owner in Belgium before being sent back to the US at North Carolina's Bureau of Veterans of Foreign Wars, which used the car for parades and distinguished events. In 2002, it was sold to a European collector and then to a Russian billionaire in 2009. And now the worldwide auctioneers event in Scottsdale at the city's annual classic car event.
I think when you look at the car, it's the most historically significant car as an artifact that there is, and it's the most historically important World War II item that there ever could be. So to take this now and use it as a positive is exactly what the owner wanted to do. Now it can be used as an educational tool and to raise money.
Word on the street is that the Hitler automobile could sell for millions of dollars And more importantly, 10% of the sale price will be donated and used for education on the Holocaust, as well as on how to prevent such atrocities in the future. Bureau Report, WION.